Hey,
Hello there.
thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. And this is a
Okay.
topic that is near and dear to me.
Yeah, me as well. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just dive in. I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Uh-huh.
Um, okay, so for the first question, I was wondering, do you think people can become addicted to anything? Why or why not?
Okay. Great question to start with. So yes, I do believe that people can become addicted to anything because the um, the anything, drugs, alcohol, food, busyness, um, promiscuity, shopping, the anything is not the problem. The problem is some people um, turn to substances or other kinds of addictive behaviors um, instead of dealing with the issues that they're faced with because they don't have the skills. They don't have the coping skills. They weren't born with uh, the things that might be needed or might be necessary to meet life on life's terms without the substances, without the busyness or the promiscuity or the shopping. So, yeah, so I think people can become addicted to literally anything. And I've seen in my own experience, I've seen where someone will put down a substance and pick up something else to replace it over and
Mm-hmm.
over and over again. I've seen that, which just further validates that, we can become addicted to literally anything.
Yeah, I like how you elaborated on that. I do agree. I'm not I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you my opinion, but I do agree. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I mean that's a good segue to the next question is if you have an understanding of what's going on in an addict's brain in terms of like science or like chemical imbalances that makes them like unable to stop partaking in their addiction.
Yeah. Oh, man. So, my own addiction story. There was one time when I was at death's door. I was in a medically induced coma. I was septic. My parents were told that I probably wasn't going to live. I had lost kidney function in one kidney. Um, I survived all of that. It took a while, but for me to regain my strength and what have you. But it wasn't enough to make me stop. I was
Hmm.
continuing to repeat the behavior that got me in that hospital in the first place. Um, and I've heard in the rooms, I've heard that in the 12 step rooms, I've heard a similar story over and over and over again. Nobody in their right mind on their worst day once would put their feet on the floor and say, today's the day I'm going to put my entire life at risk and everything that's important to me. No one
Hmm.
would do that. No one would do that. And so for me, food addiction, I mean, that's where I spent most of my time because I learned pretty early that it wasn't a good idea to drink on the job, but I could eat on the job. It wasn't a
Hmm.
good idea for me to, when just things got tough in my life, it wasn't a good idea for me to excuse myself from a meeting, go snort coke in the bathroom, and then come back to work. But I could leave the meeting, walk down the block, and go grab flour and sugar, a bag of it, a box of it, whatever it was, and bring it back to the office and indulge while I was going through my workday. I'm a high functioning addict. On the outside, I look like an overachiever, but what fueled all of that was my addiction. And what was going on the inside, no one could see, no one could know. I couldn't stop. You've heard the phrase, before anyone could begin to arrest their addiction one day at a time, they have to hit some kind of bottom. Uh,
Mhm.
and the bottom is when you stop digging, because
Right.
just when you think you can't get any lower, you can. You can write bad checks. You can steal money from somebody. You can eat your roommate's food. You can, there's all kinds of things that you could continue to do. You think it's your bottom, but you can go lower. So the physiological response that my body has is that one is too many and 100's not enough. Addiction is
Mhm.
a disease of more, because you're chasing the hit, or for me, it wasn't a hit as much as it was anesthesia. I wanted to continue to numb myself. Um,
Right, yeah, I know a lot of addicts that have that same tendency.
yeah, yeah. So what goes on in an addict's brain? I know there's a lot of science out there. Um, in fact, the doctors who back in 1930 something um, was working with Bill and Bob when they started Alcoholics Anonymous. There's research that goes back all the way to the 30s that suggests that an addict's brain is not like a normal person's brain, which is what makes it possible for them to become an addict in the first place. It's like
Mhm.
there could be 10 kids sitting around um, breaking into their parents' liquor cabinet, right? 10 kids sitting there in a circle, doing shots. One of those 10 kids is going to end up an addict, an alcoholic.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, it's something went on in the brain, something lit up or something dulled down. I don't know the science, but there's plenty of science out there to support the theory that there is something that goes on in an addict's brain that does make it impossible uh, to stop. I mean, I think of the drug addicts who lose their jobs, their families, their kids, their health. They put themselves at tremendous risk. They're not doing it because they want to. They're doing it because they
Yeah.
can't stop doing it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I know. It's it's a tough thing, and I think it's interesting that I included this in my brainstorming mind map as an interest topic because, on the examples that I saw, one included, like, racism and a lot of, like, just I wouldn't say it's surface level, but it's just, like, the terms, like homelessness,
Hmm.
racism, it's just the terms. With another one, it was, like, recreational activities and, being a better mom and a few other things, but
Uh-huh.
I know that part of the assignment is to kind of come up with something that interests you that has problems,
Hmm.
and whether they have solutions or not is not really the point of it, but I like that we're talking about this because it does interest me, and the fact that I'm majoring in psychology, um, I definitely want to touch more on the brain chemistry and stuff like that in my
Yeah.
upper division classes coming up. But yeah, and like I know for question three, it's do you believe addiction is hereditary? I think, of course, I mean, you'd think that's a pretty straightforward yes, but a lot of
Yeah.
people don't believe that. So what do you
Yeah.
think?
I think that there is a genetic predisposition that,
Mhm.
um, like, I come from a long line of addicts, alcoholics, street drug users, prescription drug users, food addicts, long line of addicts. Some were highly functional, some were not. Some couldn't get out of bed on a daily basis, and others couldn't stop working. uh, and provide for their families and the life that they wanted. Um, and I've seen in my own family where the disease will present itself somewhere in every following generation. And I did read an article once that suggested it would take 3 generations to breed out the gene, the addiction gene, provided
Wow.
provided you don't um, commit yourself to in a
Yeah.
relationship with somebody who has the gene,
Yeah.
right? So, throughout the only way that works, you've got the gene. It'll take you 3 generations to breed it out, as long as no other addicts get added to the equation.
Right. I wonder how many times that's really happened.
I don't know. I don't know. I know there are families that don't have addicts.
Yeah. I haven't met a lot of those, but I envy
Yeah,
them in a way.
yeah. Well, in some of them, and because that's the other thing about addiction, you don't start out smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
You don't start with that. You don't start with a fifth of vodka.
Right.
It's a
Of
it's a
course.
progressive disease, right? It's a progressive disease. So there are times when I think um, circumstances in life created a situation where I could hold my addiction at bay, but then, a year later, 2 years later, when it does revive itself, it's twice or 3 times as strong.
Yeah. Yeah, that blows my mind, but I know firsthand as well that that's a
Yeah.
possibility, and I know that they always say, um, the first time is like a gift of when you are abstinent because you have that desperation, and then it just
Hmm.
gets harder and harder, um, with each relapse, so to speak.
Hmm. Yeah. No, um, yeah, and I've heard too. It sounds cliche. There's different ways that I've heard people express it, but when let's say you're going to a 12-step meeting, while you're in your 12-step meeting and your meeting lasts 90 minutes, for those 90 minutes, you are not using your drug, whether it's food,
Mhm.
alcohol, narcotics, whatever it is. You're not using that drug for those 90 minutes that you're in that meeting. And while you're in that meeting, your addict is out in the parking lot doing push ups, just waiting
Oh,
for the
wow.
meeting to end.
Yeah,
Because the
yeah,
goal of the addict, um, when my addict's in play, the goal is to kill me. That's the end game.
yeah, of
Death is the
course.
end game because
And
it's the
do you think we're like, I know we're talking about meetings, do you think that 12-step programs are, like, the one and only answer to addiction?
it's interesting. I don't know that they are the one and only answer. Um, in fact, I would suggest they're not the only answer because there are so many rehab centers all over the country, all over the world. There
Yeah.
are so many rehab centers, and a lot of them have nothing to do with 12-step recovery. And one of the jobs I had in HR in one of the companies I worked in was to find plush little rehab centers for cross addicted traders during the 80s. So these
Oh,
were these
wow.
were young men, for the most part men. There were very few women. Um, these were young men who couldn't get out of the way of making fistfuls of money as institutional traders. And this would have been 80, 84, 85, 86. And they had more money than they knew what to do. A lot of them came from very blue collar, um, uh, lower middle class backgrounds.
Mhm.
But they went to college. They, got their finance degrees or their business degrees. They entered into this um, uh, institutional trading business. And it was at a time you won't remember this, but it was because you weren't even born, and maybe you never studied it. But it was a time where there was a lot of mergers and acquisitions and arbitrageurs who were making millions of dollars for their investors. And so they were spending their money. These guys were spending their money living large, and one after the other became addicted. And I would find them rehab centers, and to go stay in and get clean. Some of those institutions had 12 step as part of their format, and some did not.
Mhm.
um, 12 step is what's worked for me, and I've tried hundreds of things in my lifetime, hundreds hundreds of things. And that's the only thing that's ever worked for me is 12-step recovery, because the disease is a physical, mental, and spiritual disease.
Mhm.
So the recovery in a rehab center might only be physical.
Yeah.
Maybe they even throw in some therapy. Let's say they throw in some therapy. So now you've got physical and mental. But
Mhm.
until the spiritual um, piece of it is addressed, um, it's harder to arrest one day at a time. Because
Mhm.
that's the thing about this disease, it's incurable. There's no cure.
Yeah. 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 I that's the reality of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, it
Yeah.
sucks. It sucks. There's no graduation. There's no um, uh, conclusion. It's one day at a time, and that's what 12-step recovery does for you. The other thing it does for you, um, I don't mean you individually, I mean the
I know.
universal you. The other thing it does is it provides a blueprint for living, because again, that's not what addicts have. It's not the
Yeah.
substance that's their problem. It's their life that's the problem.
Mhm.
So 12-step recovery provides a blueprint for living, so that you don't need to pick up alcohol. You don't need to pick up drugs. You don't need to pick up nicotine, promiscuity, shopping, food. You don't need to pick it up. There's something else that you can do instead.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great point. I know that's an interesting answer. I was pondering on that myself, and I feel like there simply aren't 12-step programs for every addiction, since
Hmm.
obviously we both agree that addiction can come in any form, or any substance, I should say.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think since, I've been in in the rooms before, and I know a lot of other people who have, and I I've heard a lot of success stories, and of course it's not the same for everyone, and it's not always right away that they get the help they need, but I think it's really great that they exist.
Hmm.
Um of course. But I know we were talking about digging a deep hole for oneself, and I think it's my last question, is it pertains to um mental health, and how addiction plays a significant role in an addict's mental health. Do you believe that that's true?
I do. In fact, one of the hardest things, gosh, it's really taken me back. But when I was introduced to 12-step recovery, and I didn't know anything about it, I have a sister who had uh, 12-step um, Alcoholics Anonymous in her history, but I really didn't know anything about 12-step recovery. And the the when I got into the rooms, when I was lucky enough, blessed, if you will, to find my way to 12-step recovery for my own addiction, it was such a relief to hear that it was a disease and that it wasn't a moral issue, it wasn't a willpower issue, it wasn't an intellectual issue. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't, it was a relief to be able to say, I'm an addict and I have a disease. What was
Mhm.
hard, what was hard was, as part of step one, was to accept that I have a mental illness. There's
Mhm.
such a
Yeah.
stigma. There's such a stigma in our society around mental health and mental illness that I really struggled with um, admitting, accepting, not admitting, accepting that I have mental illness.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was hard. But to your question, um, I do believe that my mental illness, my mental health deteriorates significantly when I am active in my disease.
Mhm.
And the wreckage of my past is all the evidence I need to validate that that's true for me. The
Right.
decisions I make or made, the actions I took, the behaviors, um, all of that, uh, all of that was a shit show and a huge mess when I was active in my disease.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yep. And I
That's
think
usually how it is.
that's true of every addict. They're
Yeah, even if you're functioning.
Yeah, even if I was highly
Yeah.
functional, but I was a financial disaster. I'd been married
Mm.
3 times by the time I was 34.
Mhm.
I found myself exercising very poor judgment in a number of situations.
Mhm.
So um, yeah, yeah, I do. When my disease is active, or I'm active in my disease, um, because my disease is always active, right? Like I said, there's no cure. But when I'm active in my disease, my mental health deteriorates
Yeah.
significantly.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
some people that don't truly understand addiction tend to think that either they're in denial that you have a problem and they think that you just need therapy for your mental health,
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Or
or
it's
which is
just
can be
willpower.
yeah, or and it can be really frustrating. So I do see both sides, meaning like how you can infer that a person can't be addicted to working or working out or any I mean anything that's not super common these days, to their knowledge. I think that it's easy to just be like, well, no, that's not possible.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and they just think that therapy is the end all be all to
Or yeah,
bring
or
you
that
back.
you're just lazy. You're just not, you're just not trying. You
Ew.
know, yeah,
Yeah.
you're just not trying. I mean, if yeah, every time a doctor would say um, something like, well, you need to do this, you need to do that, I would just think, you dumb fuck. If I could do it, I would do it, but I
Right.
can't. I
Right.
try. I try so hard. I can't.
Yeah.
I couldn't.
That's one of the reasons I wanted to interview you is because as one of my interviewees, because I know that you have a deeper understanding, and even if you didn't, I still appreciate the head on your shoulders and would love your opinions, but I
Hmm.
know that um it's a big part in your family's life, and
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
immediate family's life and everything.
Yeah.
So,
And we have lots of addicts in our family who don't have 12-step recovery.
I
Um,
know, yeah.
and you know, some of them even like in one case, we've got a family member who's not drinking, but they're not in recovery, and that would be referred to as what we call a dry drunk. They
Uh-huh.
they don't have 12 steps. They don't have any kind of um, physical, mental, and spiritual solutions.
Mhm.
All they have is an empty um, bar. There's no there's no alcohol in their home, but they're not um, happy, joyous, or free. That's for darn sure,
Right.
because they're constantly thinking about what they could be drinking, or would be drinking, or want to be drinking. Um, yeah, it's really hard to watch.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Mm.
I don't have a lot of time left since I don't pay for Zoom. Um,
Okay.
but I really appreciate you taking the time
Yes.
to go through these um and get your input on stuff and be vulnerable. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome. All right. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. All righty.
Okay, bye.
Bye.